Now, by the late 30s, however, it became very clear that another war was going to happen. And so it presented therefore a major opportunity to the revolutionaries to do what they had been attempting to do all through, which was to try and instigate yet another revolt in the Indian armed forces. And this is when Subhash Bose, who had been originally, of course, in the Congress, but had increasingly become frustrated by the Gandhian approach, he became involved in the revolutionary movement. He met many of the old revolutionary leaders, including Sachindranath Sanyal, Savarkar, and others, and began to discuss what are the various possibilities. Now, meanwhile, the Second World War started. The revolutionaries themselves were actually quite divided about what to do about it. There was Sri Aurobindo, who, although he was no longer with the revolutionary movement, still had an influence. And Sri Aurobindo's view was that they should, in fact, look at the larger good of humanity and oppose the Axis and fascist forces. There were those such as Sachindranath Sanyal who took the view that every opportunity should be used to try and cause an insurrection amongst the British Indian Army. And then there were others like Savarkar who felt that while there could be a revolt in a later stage, this was a good opportunity to get Indians, particularly Hindus, to learn how to use arms and ammunition and get training in preparation for perhaps a future revolt. There was one important character in all of this, of course, was Raj Bihari Bose. Now, Raj Bihari Bose, remember, in the First World War, with the help of the Ghadarites, had attempted to do exactly this, which is to instigate a revolt in the British Indian Army. And when the Japanese took over Singapore and the large numbers of Indian soldiers who had surrendered there, he immediately flew down to Singapore and organized them into a new army called the Indian National Army, or the Azad Hind Fauj as was known. It is important here to remember that it was Raj Bihari Bose, the old revolutionary, not Netaji Subhash Bose, who originally set up the INA. Now, meanwhile, Netaji Subhash Bose had escaped from his house arrest in Kolkata, made his way through Afghanistan and Soviet Union to Germany, where he was trying to convince Hitler to help him lead a revolt against the British. But he didn't get very much of a good reception there. So he then escaped, as the very famous story of him taking a German submarine to somewhere in the Indian Ocean, switching to a Japanese one, making his way to Tokyo and then ultimately to Singapore. And when he reached Singapore, he found that there was already an Indian National Army, but Raj Bihari Bose by this point was already quite an old man and not very well as far as his health was concerned. So Raj Bihari Bose handed over the control of the Indian National Army to Subhash Bose. And Subhash Bose then led his troops along with the Japanese in their attempt to invade India from the northeast. Of course, this attempt to invade India from the northeast did not succeed, although there were very tough fought battles in Imphal and Kohima. But the Japanese ultimately lost in 1944, and ultimately their entire war effort fell apart. The Indian National Army began to disintegrate, and at the end of the war, of course, Subhash Bose himself may have died in a plane crash in Taipei, although there is still some dispute about exactly what happened to him. Now, this whole episode that happened in the 1940s, in the Second World War, could again be seen as yet another attempt by the revolutionaries to cause a armed insurrection and failing. But this experiment, however, had a afterlife that was very important, which was that when the Indian National Army troops were brought back to India, they were brought back as traitors to be tried. There was a lot of sympathy that was happened as a result of this. And when the trials started in the Red Fort against some of the officers of the Indian National Army, there was a wave of support, including in the Indian Army, which had otherwise remained loyal to the British.